Dan Lanning has done a great job of building Oregon into something that he envisioned for a long time. This is a team that expects big things in 2024, even with a transition to a new conference. They joined the Big Ten, but they fully expect to win the Big Ten in their first season with the conference. So let's take a deep dive into the Oregon Ducks. Before we do that, though, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. We are wrapping up our deep dive series, and it has been a great series for the channel. That's not possible without all of you, and I can't thank all of you enough for what you have done. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. This has been a really fun ride. There's a lot to talk about. I love talking about college football, and all of you are very passionate as well. So I'm excited to keep this going, and let's do that with the Oregon Ducks. Now, when Dan Lanning came to Oregon, there was a lot of excitement. He is a guy who brings a lot of energy to the program, and he is someone who has high expectations for his team. And it's easy to see why. He has done a great job of recruiting. He's embraced NIL. He has a great message, a coach that I think is going to push you quite a bit. But he's also a coach that looks like he really cares about his players. And I think that's a great combination of things to have in a head coach. And he is someone that has brought Oregon to a good place. And he's in a position that has a ton of resources, and he is embracing this new era of college football from NIL to the transfer portal. He's also leaning into something that's been an advantage for Oregon in Nike for a long time, and that's going to be a lot for this team to have success for the long run. And Dan Lanning could really build Oregon into something special. You also bring back Will Stein, who had a major impact on this team last year, one of the best offenses in college football under his watch, under his play calling. And Tosh Lupoi is back to run the defense, a defense that was also one of the better groups in college football. So you have a coaching staff that feels like it's in a great spot. You also feel like there's a ton of talent coming back, as well as from the transfer portal that makes you feel really good. Now, the transfer portal was very kind to the Oregon Ducks. Not that you needed it to be, because this staff knew exactly what they needed in terms of talent. And they did a really good job of bringing in elite players as well as players that are maybe going to fill some rotational roles. So you have to tip your cap to this staff. Now you bring in a talent like Derek Harmon to compete on the interior defensive line. You also bring in Jamari Caldwell from Houston. Now, Jamari Caldwell is someone that people did not know heading into 2023. And I don't think a lot of people knew who he was until he committed to the Ducks. Honestly, a lot of people did not pay attention to Houston last year. And obviously, there's a reason why, because they struggled so much. But Jamari Caldwell's tape was super impressive. So let's be honest. If someone tells you that they're a big Jamari Caldwell fan and they're not from Houston, I probably wouldn't believe them, honestly. I probably would say that they're not really paying attention. They just noticed that he committed to Oregon, but that says a lot about what his talent level can do. And he is someone that I think is going to have a major impact early for this team. Now, when you look at what else they brought, this Jabbar Muhammad get coming from Washington. He initially committed to Texas, and Oregon actually flipped him to come to Oregon. That's a huge addition when you lose certain players like Kyrie Jackson, RIP to Kyrie. That's obviously a tough loss for this program. But you bring in a talent like Jabbar Muhammad to potentially replace him, and what Jabbar Muhammad did in 2023 for Washington speaks volumes to what he can do in 2024. And Oregon expects some big things from him. Cam Alexander comes in from UTSA, could also do similar things there. You also bring in Brandon Johnson from Duke in the secondary as well. You get Cruz Rushing from Arizona, Kobe Savage. So I think that you have certain players that are ready to take on new challenges with their new school. And the Oregon Ducks are excited to see what they can do on the defensive side of the ball. Then you get to the big ones. Evan Stewart coming in from Texas A&M. That was a huge addition for Oregon, especially with the talented player you lose in Troy Franklin. They expect some big things from him. You also obviously got two quarterbacks in Dante Moore, who appears to be the future of this program, and you bring in Dylan Gabriel, who is the Heisman frontrunner for college football. So you feel pretty good about what you bring in. You also bring in Matthew Bedford to play tackle from Indiana. So this is a staff that's done a good job on the recruiting trail. They've also done a good job of getting guys from the transfer portal. Now, you didn't honestly, I don't feel like they lost a ton of players that maybe make a huge dent in certain positions. I think that certain players were solid, but I don't know if you necessarily lost anybody that you feel was irreplaceable or just is going to be really tough to move on from. That speaks a lot to what this staff has done. They figured out who do they need to retain, who do they need to bring in, and who were they okay with losing? And I think when you look at this list of departures, you don't feel like you have a ton of concerns if you're an Oregon fan. And we'll start with the offense here. We'll start with Will Stein's group. There's a lot to be excited about, like we mentioned before. And everything obviously starts with Dylan Gabriel. Now, Dylan Gabriel has had quite the journey. The former, at one point, Army commit. I think people just take that for granted. When you look at that, you just this is a guy who is going to commit to a team that's going to run the triple option and rarely throw the football. And Dylan Gabriel is looking to break records as a passer now. That's just a wild journey. That's so fun to watch. Starts his career with UCF, transfers to Oklahoma, and has a solid time at Oklahoma, and then hits the transfer portal once again and goes to what a lot of people consider NIL heaven in Eugene, Oregon. So he comes in, and it's not that Dylan Gabriel is going to be the most talented quarterback that you ever have, but he is someone who is a smart decision maker. He understands what he needs to do with the football, and he takes care of the football. Maybe he doesn't have the biggest arm, but he does throw a pretty long ball as well. So you have the ability to stretch the field vertically. You also have the ability to make some smart plays. Dylan Gabriel is going to give you that. And that's huge for a guy like Dante Moore, who's going to learn a lot sitting behind him. Now, Dante Moore had a very rocky experience at UCLA. There was a lot of hype about him committing to the Bruins. At one point, he did commit to the Ducks. So it was almost like a full circle moment for Oregon to get him back. And he is going to be the future of this program. Learning from Dylan Gabriel is going to do a lot for his career, I think. Austin Novosad is behind him. I don't expect Novosad to compete with Dante Moore long term. Dante Moore is the future of this program, and it's going to be fun to see what they both learn from Dylan Gabriel. Gabriel has played a lot of college football, so he has plenty of experiences to share with these two. So we'll see what that all means for this team. The rushing attack, you lose Bucky Irving. And let's be honest, that's a big loss. Bucky Irving, honestly, even with the amount of people talking about him last year, Bucky Irving did not get the love that he deserved. He was an absolute phenomenal talent, arguably the toughest running back to tackle in college football. You simply just could not tackle him. I mean, just ask Washington how much fun it was to tackle him. He was so good. But this staff feels really good about what they have coming back. Jordan James was a backup last year, played a big role, 759 yards, averaged 7.1 yards per carry last year. You also get Noah Whittington back, and somehow Noah Whittington is only a junior. That just seems wrong to me. I feel like his Western Kentucky days, he was there for forever, and he's been at Oregon for what feels like a long time. So I just yeah, that's crazy. But he is back as well, a good player for this team. You also feel pretty good. You added a solid player in the transfer portal in Jay Harris, 6'2", 215 pounds. So while you have Jordan James coming in at 5'10", 210, and Whittington's at 5'8", 194, you had a good sized running back in Jay Harris that could play a big role for that rushing attack as well. That's a good trio to have. Jalen Lamar is another one that could play a bigger role in that rushing attack as well. So the running attack, even with losing Bucky Irving, they feel like they're in a good position. You don't have a ton of concerns if you are the Ducks, and the Dylan Gabriel can also run. Keep that in mind too. They're not going to want him to run a ton, but he is capable of running. He is capable of picking up big air. Again, back to the Army recruits. There's a reason why Army wanted him, and it wasn't because they wanted him to throw the football. This is a guy that can run the football. He's going to help with this rushing attack. He's going to make this offense really explosive, really fun to watch. And that's going to be a fun backfield to pay attention to, whether you're a college fantasy player or whether you're just a college football fan. Oregon has, again, once again, Oregon has a really exciting backfield that could light up scoreboards this year. And we go to the guys that are going to catch passes from Dylan Gabriel. And once again, you have a group that's going to be lights out at times, very electric, very explosive. Will Stein has an abundance of riches at the wide receiver position, and you feel pretty good about what you have coming back. Says Johnson is one of the fastest players in college football. He is back once again. Trayshawn Holden, they're looking for him to take a step forward in terms of being an explosive weapon for this offense. I think that he has shown at times a couple flashes. They are waiting for him to be a better player than what we've seen so far. And if he does take that step, this offense feels like it's in good hands. Evan Stewart, we talked about before, 6'3", 175 pounds, comes in from Texas A&M, had over 1,100 yards with the Aggies in his 2 years there. So you feel like you're in great hands with him coming in. You also return Gary Bryant, a very slept on player, and if Bryant can get on the field, I think that he has a good value for this offense. But outside of that is where you kind of have maybe some concerns. You have unproven talent behind those guys. So that maybe the depth, if you will, is a concern for Oregon's passing attack. But again, once you get outside of Johnson, Holden, Stewart, and Bryant, you maybe don't know if you necessarily need those guys to be regular contributors unless someone goes down with an injury or whatnot. The tight end position is going to play a big role as well, and you feel really good about what you have coming back there. Terrence Ferguson comes in at 6'6", 248 pounds, had 414 yards last year, was a pretty important player for this offense and should be that once again. He's one of the better tight ends in college football. Patrick Herbert, the brother of Justin Herbert, we saw him at random times. I think when you watch the Washington game, he had a couple of big plays. And so you have good depth at the tight end position. Kenyon Sadiq is another guy who could play a big role. So again, you feel pretty good about the tight end position. You feel really good about you have the wide receiver position. Again, depth maybe is a concern, but again, you have to see multiple guys go down before you truly have to tap too far into that depth. And that's going to be a really fun group to watch. And then also you have a really fun offensive line that's going to take care of business as well. That's going to make life very easy for Dylan Gabriel and the skill position players, and that's going to be huge. And Dan Lanning understands that he needs good offensive linemen if he wants to win football games. And winning in the Big Ten is going to require you to be physical, and winning a national championship is going to require you to do the exact same thing. If you want to win a football game, your offensive line has to be a strength of your team. And Oregon has one of the best offensive lines in college football. Now, obviously, everyone's going to point to Josh Connerly. You have a future NFL talent in him at left tackle. Ajani Cornelius had a really interesting year last year. He transferred from Rhode Island and stepped in right away to compete for a starting spot. So that's going to be another guy to keep an eye on. Maybe not as hyped as Josh Connerly, but you still feel really good about what he brings back. You have three seniors, a junior, and a sophomore that are going to lead the charge here. The guard positions feel like they're in good hands. Matthew Bedford, we talked about before, coming in from Indiana. Marcus Harper is back for another year. Those are guys that have a ton of experience. The center position is really where things are kind of up for grabs. Maybe Charlie Pickard is going to be that guy. Iapani Lalolu is going to be in that rotation as well, competing for that starting spot, I should say. Played 14 games, had a start last year. Pickard just played 2 games in his first 2 years, 13 games last year. So both of those guys will be in the running for that. The center position is such a vital position for any offense, and Oregon is no exception to that. But you feel pretty good, even with the center position maybe being up for grabs. You have plenty of talent coming back. You have plenty of talent and plenty of experience. That's going to be huge, especially with the skill positions being what they are for Oregon. So if you're looking at this from an Oregon Ducks perspective, you honestly should feel really good, even if you are biased. You have plenty of talent to utilize offensively, and there's good talent on the offensive line to handle life in the trenches. So not too many concerns if you're Oregon's offense. You obviously want to keep Dylan Gabriel healthy, and you have the playmaking talent to make that happen. Now, the defense is going to be interesting to watch. You had some surprises return. to this defense, and one of them was on the defensive line, was probably one of the bigger surprises. Getting Jordan Birch back was one of the bigger surprises in college football. I don't think a lot of people expected him to come back, but there was a chance that he was going to. So he comes back, and he is someone that is set to have an even bigger year than he did in 2023. It might be a little bit more difficult now that teams know exactly what he's capable of doing. But again, you're going into a new conference, so maybe teams aren't fully aware of what he is capable of doing. Behind him, Amari and Winston could play a bigger role this year as well. I think that he is set. He played in 14 games last year, had 19 tackles. Blake Purchase could also be one of those guys. Opposite of Jordan Birch, a lot of people are going to compete for this spot. So you Tatum Tuiatoe, excuse me, Teo Chiote is going to be one of those guys that competes. Mateo Uyangalele is another guy that we saw last year in flashes. Elijah Rushing is someone that this staff was really excited about to get him out of high school. I think that they are expecting big things from him. So that spot is up for grabs. And it's a spot that has a lot of potential to be really good with Jordan Birch commanding so much attention. We talked about Derek Harmon at the defensive tackle position coming in from Michigan State. He is someone that is ready to show that he has experience in the Big Ten, so that won't be much of a shock for him. He's just doing it with a different team that's joining a new conference. Amari Washington could be behind him. Jamari Caldwell, we talked about before, an absolute phenomenal talent, very athletic for his size, 6'1", 325 pounds. This is a group that has really good size up front, a lot of explosive players. You could also see someone like Keon Ware Hudson play a role as well. So you feel pretty good about the depth you have at the defensive tackle position. So even if you have some new faces that need to step up, Jordan Birch is that the anchor, if you will, that foundational piece that you return, and then you just have to find guys that can play. I think Mateo Uiagalelei is one to keep an eye on for sure. He is someone that showed really explosive flashes in 2023. But again, there are some really good players. Tuioti is one of those guys that's going to compete with him. And Elijah Rushing, again, when you're recruiting at the level that Oregon's playing, guys like Elijah Rushing could have bigger roles than maybe people anticipate. And again, it's not a bad thing to have as much depth as you do, and Oregon feels like they're in a good spot, even with those new faces taking over. The linebacker position should be just as good as it was last year. You have a lot of good talent coming back, and it starts with Justin Jacobs and Jeffrey Bassa. So you have a lot of players that are coming in to play bigger roles, but you also have players returning that are going to give you that stability. And these are two players that do that. Now, Jeffrey Bassa is back for another year. He is the leader of that defense. You've seen, if you watch on film, he's a very good communicator. That's one of the things I've noticed about him. He is going to get the guys in right positions. If he even sees the slightest thing different with the offense, he is pointing it out. He is shouting at his guys to either adjust or point something out. Hey, he's going this way. It's going to be this play, that kind of stuff. He is a student of the game, very aware of what's going on. Behind them, Devin Jackson could be someone that plays a bigger role for them. Again, they're going to need someone to play a bigger role. So you have someone like him. Connor Sewell is going to be another guy, the Arizona State transfer, I should say. It is going to be a fun player to watch as a backup as well. So you have certain players that have experience, but Jacobs and Bassa are going to be those two leaders. The seniors have a major impact on this defense already, and they are ready to do it once again. So you feel pretty good about where you're at the linebacker position. It's just maybe a question of who's going to be the depth piece that steps up, who's going to be part of that rotation to make those plays. Because Massa again it's going to be tough to get him off the field because of his not only his physical abilities but his mental abilities as well. Justin Jacobs has the ability to be a special player for the Ducks, and with the talent they have up front, sometimes they're going to make really easy plays because of the disruptiveness of the group in front of them. Now, the secondary is where you see a little bit of turnover. You're going to see some fresh faces, but honestly, I think you might see a group that takes a step forward because of the guys that they brought in. Now, Brandon Johnson is one of those guys. He's a guy who played in the nickel for Duke last year, and he's going to play that similar role, the star position for the Ducks. He is someone that knows exactly how to play that position. He's very comfortable. It's just a matter of learning a new system and learning what he's expected to do and how to communicate with his teammates if he needs to do that. Dalen Austin could be another guy that's in that rotation, but Brandon Johnson, that's his spot to lose. The cornerback position is in great hands with Dante Manning coming back. You also, like we talked about before, you bring in Jabbar Muhammad. So you don't have really any concerns about the cornerback position. Again, another example of you almost feel like you're taking a step forward because of the talent that you have coming in. You bring in Nico Reed from Colorado. Now, again, I don't know if you're necessarily bringing a talent like Nico Reed in 2 years ago if you aren't sold on his abilities, because again, Colorado was not good defensively by any means. So that's definitely a name to keep an eye on. Cam Alexander will push for starting time as well. I think that you also, even if you look at Jalil Florence, you feel pretty good about the depth you have at the cornerback position. Again, Jabbar Muhammad and Dante Manning will be the starters, but if you see one or both of them go down, I don't think you have a ton of worries if you're Oregon. The level of play will obviously dip. There's a reason why the starters are the starters, but if you lose those two guys, you don't necessarily have to panic over what might be. The safety position, kind of similar. I wouldn't say it's as good as the corner position, although Kobe Savage was a huge addition from Kansas State, a guy who has been a starter for them for quite a bit of time. And he is someone that is going to step in and be a major impact player for this team right away. Tyler Turner behind him is a redshirt freshman. Again, talking about that young talent that is going to potentially give this group good playing time right off the bat. And we'll see what kind of depth we get there. Tysheem Johnson comes in from Ole Miss. So you're looking at what this team brings, and Tysheem Johnson and Kobe Savage feel like a solid duo, maybe kind of an underrated duo, if you will. You also brought in Peyton Woodyard from the transfer portal. So you have guys that are going to step up and play what I think is going to be a high level. If you're the Oregon Ducks, you feel really good about that situation. And you're going to face some really talented offenses. You're going to face some really talented wide receiver groups. And one of the benefits of Oregon is that their secondary and the wide receivers get to go against each other. So you're going to face some really good competition in practice so that when you get to the games, you don't necessarily have to worry about the shock of playing a really good player because you've done that all week. You've done that all off season. You've done that all year. You do not have to worry about that. And you also brought in good talent that should step up. Now, there's going to be some chemistry that needs to be figured out with that many new faces. You're going to have to figure out how to communicate with your new teammates. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. But again, minor things when you look at the bigger picture. So Oregon feels like it's in good hands with the talent it has returning, and that bodes well for them with the schedule that they have. Now, the schedule for the Oregon Ducks doesn't necessarily get off to a difficult start, but it's definitely an interesting start. Idaho is going to be a win, although Idaho was a pretty good FCS team last year. So that'll be fun to see how Idaho competes against Oregon. Then you also look at Boise State. That's a team that is looking to get to the college football playoff, and a strong performance against the Ducks could make their case much better. But I expect Oregon to win that game. The one thing that I'll say, and I talked about this in my Boise State deep dive, is Boise State got smoked by Washington, and Washington was a playoff team. I kind of expect Oregon to do the same thing because Oregon is going to be a playoff team this year, and Boise State just isn't on that level. Boise State fans are pretty confident about their abilities. If this was at Boise State, maybe, but the fact that it's in Eugene tells me all I need to know. Then you play Oregon State the next week. Now, that's an interesting game because while Oregon is the better team, it is that rivalry game. And one of the things that I don't like about the the conference realignment is that you're losing some of the rivalry games or you're moving those to different aspects. And maybe Oregon fans don't care about the Oregon State rivalry anymore, but that's one thing that just kind of bums me out. I just wish that we could keep everything the same as what it was. But again, conference realignment, money rules the world. But still, it's a tough game to play this early in the season. The fact that it's a road trip makes it a little bit more interesting. But again, if Oregon is truly a playoff team, then you shouldn't have too many concerns about that game. And then you get 2 weeks off before you travel to UCLA, which is a Big Ten conference game, which feels weird, but that is a game that Oregon should win. You get Michigan State at home. That's another game that, you face a familiar foe in Jonathan Smith. We'll see what Michigan State is at that point. And then the big one, Ohio State at home, October 12th. That's the one that everyone's been talking about already. So we don't have to really dive into that. We'll obviously preview that later on this channel when that comes up during that week. That's going to be a big one that determines a lot for the Big Ten championship race, as well as the college football race there. So then you go to at Purdue, you get Illinois at home. Those are two games that I don't have any concerns about. At Michigan is going to be a tough one because we'll know how legitimate Michigan is at that point. So if they are a good team, then Michigan is going to give them quite a bit of trouble. But I think that Oregon is the better team. I think Michigan is going to take a little bit of a step back this year. And also now it just reminds me of watching Dennis Dixon do the Statue of Liberty and the fake Statue of Liberty. I just got flashbacks of that. So maybe you'll see an ode to them. Maybe that's something that Dan Lanning has up his sleeve, but also he's just trying to win football games. So he probably doesn't care about that. But that would be really fun to watch in Oregon's return to the big house. Maryland at home shouldn't be a concern. Wisconsin could be a tricky game. If Wisconsin truly is better than what they were last year, so we will see what happens. But if they are better than last year, I think that you're looking at a game that could be potentially troublesome. The fact that it is in Camp Randall makes it a little bit more difficult, a more challenging atmosphere. But we will see what happens with that. Washington, I don't know. Washington feels like it's going to take a step back as well. So it's still going to be tough. Oregon is going to have a chip on their shoulder from losing 2 games last year to the Huskies. So that's another game to keep an eye on. Okay. So then we get to this point. Ceiling is definitely 12-0. I don't think anybody's really debating that. And it's just a matter of what the floor is. When you look at losable games, I honestly see three that I could honestly, I see one that I could convincingly argue is a loss, and that's the Ohio State game. Michigan and Wisconsin are ones that I'm not too sure about, but again, those feel like more wins than losses. So the floor, I'm gonna conservatively go 9-3, knowing full well that I expect them to be more on the 12-0 side. So we'll see what happens with that. We don't exactly know what is going to happen with this team, but it feels really good if you're an Oregon fan. You feel like you're in a good spot. Dan Lanning has done a great job on really all fronts, and it's just going to come down to, can you win football games? Can you win close football games? Because that Ohio State game is going to be back and forth, and Dan Lanning gets a chance. And honestly, Dan Lanning gets a bad rep from the Washington game. Some of the decisions he made during the game were obviously criticized and they didn't work out. But I honestly would rather have him make those decisions again because he's putting faith in his team. He's been faith in his players, and that says a lot about what he expects from them. And he's going to probably make those same decisions again. And if they can execute a little bit better, that's going to be a team that has the potential to win a national championship. And that's exactly where Oregon wants to be at the end of the year.